Thank you all very much for coming. My name is Nick Stern. I'm Professor of Economics here and Chair of the Grantham Research Institute and the Global School of Sustainability. We're here for a special occasion, but I'm supposed to do one piece of housekeeping before we kick off. There is no fire alarm scheduled, so if it goes off, they mean it, and we should go to the nearest exit. Now, we're here to celebrate Pete Betts, and we're here to celebrate this book. And you'll hear more about the book as the evening develops. But it's wonderful, miraculous that this book is here. And it's not for me to describe that process in any detail. But all of us here on the platform, and many of you there in the audience, have been admirers of Pete for a very long time, been great friends of Pete, and so it's really in celebratory mode of Pete that we are here. It's a fine book, if I may say so, and it's got ideas and messages that will carry us forward, and we'll hear about them tonight. But we're also, as I said, celebrating Pete, a quite extraordinary human being and a friend to so many of us. He was a person with deep commitment, a crystal clear analytical mind, an outstanding ability to listen, uncommon amongst academics, but mercifully more common amongst some civil servants, at least Pete. And he could understand and he could find ways through. He died of brain cancer in October of 2023. And as he got the diagnosis, he took the decision, remarkable decision, to write this book. It was well advanced when he died, and his wife, Fiona McGregor, who we're going to hear from in a moment, and Grace Pengelly, his editor, who's here with us on stage, took it with others, and a good number of others were involved in taking it forward to publication. So thank you so much to Fiona and Grace, but also on behalf of all those who contributed to completing the book. We're also going to hear from three secretaries of state. Their careers go beyond being secretaries of state, and I'm not going to go through what those distinguished careers have been, but it is a testimony to Pete that we have here very senior politicians from the three major, I think I'm allowed to say that still, the three major political parties in the UK. I'm certainly not going to mention any others. So I wanted to thank Ed, John and Ed Davey, John Gummer and Ed Miliband for being with us tonight, and we will hear from them after we hear from Fiona and Grace. And they will help us look forward as well as look back. It's a moment to look back because the book is looking back at experience, but it's a moment to look forward because the book helps us to look forward and to see what is possible. Pete underlined, and you're going to hear much more of this, but he underlined the importance of a shared, if we're to make progress as a world, we have to have a shared understanding of the science and the lesson of the science that this is urgent and it requires activity on real scale, and it requires, it's a global issue, and it requires a global response. All that flows straight from the science. We also have we also need a shared understanding that as we go down this route of change, radical change, industrial revolution in many ways, we actually have a tremendous opportunity to create a different way of growing and development, one that breaks the destructive relationship between the way we do our economic activities and the way we live on the one hand and the environment on the other. We ain't going to get to net zero through zero population, at least I hope not. But we are going to get to net zero by breaking that destructive relationship between economic activity and the environment. And as Pete demonstrated in the way he lived and the way he wrote, we need relationships with others, amongst ourselves and with people in other countries, that shows mutual respect, goodwill, and, as Pete emphasized, a continuity in those relationships. And I've worked a lot in India and China, and in India they say through 7 births, if you've been through a lot of things together. In China they say old friends are good friends, and you can run through the other languages as well. But that continuity of friendship and interaction, Pete embodied in his own life as climate diplomat, but he reminded us of the importance of that. My own experience with Pete was not first on climate. I got to the Treasury, I arrived at the Treasury from the World Bank in the autumn of 2003. Now, the Treasury is got lots of splendid people in it, and that's stacked with my friends. But at the same time, it isn't always welcoming to outsiders. And I won't go into any detail of how that's done. But Pete was working for me. I mean, he was a senior civil servant. He reported to me, and he recognized immediately that I was finding this somewhat of a puzzling place and wasn't feeling entirely at home. And Pete was wonderful. I mean, he could see other people feeling like outsiders. He had an experience of life where he felt, at least in the early days, an outsider. And he could see that in others, and he had the emotional intelligence and the warmth as a human being, and he helped me enormously in those early days. I did feel at home after a bit, but it did take a little time, and Pete was crucial in making that transition. So he is just an extraordinary human being. And I remember 2-hour conversation coming back from COP25 in Madrid, where the two of us were, it happened to be on the same flight. We both got there early. And Pete was asking me about my life and what I was doing. And he was one of those people who said, "How are you?" And he actually listened to the answer. And he was interested, and he wanted to know something about you, and you felt you wanted to know something about him. And again, we were talking a little bit about being outsiders, but recognizing, but at that point, we were both already members of the establishment. But making people feel at ease wasn't a strategy for Pete, although it was very productive. It was who he was and how he behaved and how he took things, how he lived his life. So celebrations of Pete have actually become a tradition, and it is a fantastic tradition. And it was one that was started by Pete. Pete organised a celebration of his life whilst he was still alive. I mean, that is class. How many people are able to do that? But Pete did it, and it was a fabulous occasion. Quite a lot of us were present there. It was a wonderful occasion in which Pete, of course, participated in a very strong and cheerful way. So the tradition of remembering and celebrating Pete is one that continues. We have a lecture in honour of Pete, and we will be celebrating Pete and following that tradition, I hope, indefinitely, because it allows us to essentially refresh ourselves at the well of Pete's guidance and memory and goodness. And that is thus a tradition which we should follow and will follow, because it will help keep us going. And we know on this subject life isn't always easy. It can get rather difficult. But we can see ways forward. Actually, as time goes by, those ways forward become ever more clear. And Pete saw that, and his thoughts will keep us going. And the book essentially tells us that we have to keep going and tells us how to keep going. And he's absolutely right. So we were really lucky, and we must go to have him as a colleague and friends, and we have to go on in that tradition of celebration, which of Pete's life and Pete's ideas, which Pete himself started so beautifully. Now, before I hand over to Fiona to start things off, I wanted to read a message from Todd Stern, who worked so closely with Pete over the years. And he was a special envoy for climate change for 7 years, 2009 to 2016, and a good friend, many of us. Todd and I usually refer to ourselves as Cousin Todd and Cousin Nick. We're not related, but people become more cautious because they're not quite sure whether or not we're related. So brackets, no relation. So this is from Todd. To Fiona and everyone who is part of the extended Pete Betts family, I'm so sorry to be missing this wonderful event, but I'm teaching now at Yale Law School and it just couldn't work. But this is indeed not just a wonderful event, but a wondrous one, almost miraculous. Because even knowing, as we all did, Pete's determined, stubborn, occasionally bull-headed nature, who among us could have imagined that looking death in the eye, facing a clock running inexorably down, and a body that was coming apart on him, who among us could have dreamed that we'd be standing here now with his book in our hands, and yet here we are, a testament to love and sorrow, admiration and joy. Pete would have been so enormously proud to see this day happen. Proud of himself, even if he didn't admit it, proud of and so grateful to his Fiona, who refused to let this project go, and so moved to see this extended family gathered around his book. A book that, as the excellent Polita Clark wrote a few weeks ago in the FT, is much needed at a time when our technical capacity to do what must be done has never been more hopeful, but our human capacity to turn a blind eye has rarely been more dangerous. I miss you all on this special day, and I look forward to my copy of the Climate Diplomat arriving from Amazon any day now. I can't wait. So that's from Todd Stern, and we're very grateful to Todd for that message, to Todd for being, I think, the first speaker in the memorial lecture series for Pete, and being a close friend and supporter of Pete, as we have all tried to be. So Fiona, thank you for being here. Thank you for the book. Thank you for sharing Pete with us and all you've done in your career. Fiona, there's at LSE, we have a motto, which is we want to understand the causes of things for the betterment of society. And you and Pete have worked so well for the betterment of society. Thank you.
Thank you so much to everyone for attending tonight. It's great to see so many people here, and honestly, so many friends. I can't believe it. It's lovely. This truly is a momentous occasion. It's the launch of the book. We've been talking about it for a long time. Pete's book, The Climate Diplomat, nearly 3.5 years after Pete first started to write it. So I wanted to start too with some thanks. There are a huge number of people here who input in various ways to the book. I'm not going to go through all of those because we'd be here all night. There's a list of acknowledgements in the book itself that runs to 4.5 pages, and it's in smaller font than any other bit of the book, so there is a lot of people to thank for it. Thank you. But I'd specifically like to thank this evening firstly, Bob Ward from LSE, who's at the back here, for his unfailing generosity in supporting and organising this and other events for Pete. Thank you also so much to the speakers this evening, Lord Stern for hosting, and Todd Stern for sending such touching words and for the foreword to the book. And to Ed and John, if it's okay to use your first names, for finding time in your incredibly busy schedules. And to all of you for your friendship to Pete over many, many years. It's such a testament to Pete, and Nick's already said this, and to the impact that he had, that no one ever hesitates to contribute to an opportunity to remember and to celebrate him. He would be utterly thrilled that you were all here this evening. But there are two people without whom there would be no book launch this evening. The first person is Grace Pengelly, who is helping Pete with the book. It's no exaggeration to say that there'd be no book without Grace, who worked to get it into a publishable document, worked up an absolutely brilliant pitch to publishers, and has guided me throughout. Grace, honestly, she's a truly remarkable woman. I've been inspired by meeting you and getting to know you. And the second person is Peter Jones at Profile Editions, who are the publishers of the book. Peter immediately got the book and described it in exactly the terms I think Pete himself would have used. It's a book about climate, but it's not just that. It's about politics, it's about geopolitics, it's a love letter to the civil service, as was, and it's about people and relationships. So thank you all so much. But of course, above all, it's Pete's book. And obviously I'm biased, but it's a really good book. I've had so much feedback from friends and colleagues who've been reminded of details and events that they'd forgotten, who've said they've gained a clearer understanding of what happened, when it happened, where, and the path to progress on climate negotiations. But Pete's very, very clear message, there's a few in the book, but a really clear message, is that everyone needs to go much further and much faster, and I'm sure we could all agree with that. I think it's a book that's vital reading for anyone involved in climate work. It should be on the reading lists of every student as essential reading who's studying climate in any educational institution. But it's also very definitely accessible to and a really important read for the wider public who just want to be better informed, which I count myself among, and I definitely feel better informed having worked on the book. It's Pete's final and enduring gift to us all. His voice comes through so clearly, his clear thinking, his exceptional ability to communicate, his humanity and his humour, and I hope we don't get sued, and especially his commitment, his dedication, and his incredible resilience shine throughout the book. Getting the book written at all in the circumstances in which he did so really sums up those qualities in him. He was an exceptional, remarkable man, and he's missed by so many. We all carry him in our hearts. Now we can also carry this amazing testament to him in our hands. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiona. I'm trying to see you around the, but thank you so much. Grace, we've heard about your part in the book and absolutely central. And could you please share some thoughts with us now? I think you come here.
Well, thank you. How do you follow that? Goodness me. So, editing books is a bit of a funny job. You know, you get sent books by agents a lot of the time, and you read the manuscript, and you're like, okay, this one's all right, or I'm going to pass on that one. And I had, in the summer of 2023, I just had my first baby. And I was on maternity leave, I was twiddling my thumbs, I was a bit bored. There was also these absolutely sensational heat waves going on. I don't know if any of you remember them, but it was a pretty scary time to be a new mother of a young baby. And so I was thinking a lot about climate at that point in my life. I was looking at this baby that I just brought into the world and thinking, goodness me, what have we done? A few months later on into that summer, and Polita Clark from the Financial Times, who many of you will know, got in touch with me through a friend of a friend, maybe hearing that I was on maternity leave and bored out of my mind, and said, there's a man called Pete Betts. You may know him, you may not know him, but he's the most remarkable negotiator. He's an absolute legend of UNFCCC climate diplomacy. He is writing a book and needs some help with it. And the slight catch is that he's only been given, 15 months to live. And I was like, okay, that's a fairly big ask. So I kind of got on the train to London, and I went to Pete and Fiona's house, and I met the most remarkable people. Both Pete and Fiona are just absolutely incredible human beings. And Pete it was clear to me, he was so determined. This book was always going to be published, as far as he was concerned. And meeting with him and Fiona on that day and reading the first pages of what he'd already drafted, where he describes having kind of this stroke induced by the brain tumour, I just felt incredibly moved, and I was like, this book is absolutely going to happen come hell or high water. And so that's what we did. Over the coming kind of 6 months, 7 months, until Pete's condition really started to deteriorate, we worked incredibly closely together, along with several of the people who were in this room. It was very much a collaborative effort. And what emerged is a really important book, and publishers throw that term around a lot. We think every book is important. Some books are, some books aren't. But this is a book that shows us, we often think of climate change, some people think it's still something that's happening in the future. We know that's not true. We know that it's happening now. But climate change is also, it's the history of the human species. It's something that we already have a history to look back on. And I think that that's what this book does really brilliantly. It starts to put the history of climate change negotiations into perspective for us. And we can see how, as human beings, we've either succeeded or failed in that. And Pete writes, brilliantly and very honestly about the challenges that people like him and the people who are sat here have faced as they navigate that. So it's a story about how, as human beings, we come together to try and fix some really big problems, and how we fail and how we succeed in that. When Pete died, about 80% of the book was written. And so over the next few months, things obviously went on hold. But then I emailed Fiona and I was kind of like, come on, do you want to keep on working on this? And she said yes, and I was thrilled. So we then finished off the book together. And again, we weren't sure whether or not it would be published. We weren't sure if it was ever going to see the light of day. But I'm absolutely thrilled that Profile said yes to us. Thank you, Peter. This, for me, has been such an important book to work on, one of the most important books I think I will work on. It really is a hopeful story, and a story that we all need to be listening to, listening particularly to the messages that he has for us about human relationships and how we need to be coming together as a human species across divides. He's very adamant in the concluding chapters of the book that the culture wars are something that we cannot let get in the way of climate change. We must rise above them. So that and so many other vital messages are in this book. And so I just want to encourage you all to buy it, to read it, and to spread Pete's message of kind of endurance and resilience in the face of a really complicated climate crisis that, step by step we're trying to work through. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Fiona. I'm so proud of you and proud of Pete.
Thank you so much, Grace. And we now have, I'm a crossbencher in the Lords. I'm not a member of any party. But I do want to say that we have 3 outstanding politicians with us tonight. And I'm not going to run through their history, and I'm not going to distinguish between them, but I do want to say what they have in common. In my view, as a crossbencher, not a member of any political party. They have clarity of thinking. They have commitment to tackle big issues. They have their judgment, which enables them to find a way through. And above all, they have the values. I wish I could say that about all the politicians that we're endowed with in this country, but we're very fortunate to have 3 very special ones with us tonight. And please excuse me if I don't go through individual, careers and things, but I did want to say that at the beginning. We're very fortunate to have you with us tonight. And just to repeat what I said earlier, it's a testimony to Pete that you all 3 jumped at the chance to be, without hesitation, to be here. Now, we're going to do Ed, John, Ed. We're not going to do the titles, but we start with Ed Davey, and I'm not even going to say which party. If you don't know what party, then I'll give you the opportunity, because you mustn't Google anything, but if you really need to Google that, I wonder if you should be here. But Ed, thank you so much for coming, and thank you for joining us in this celebration of Pete and the book.
I'm the one who does the bungee jumping, that's listen, the one thing we've also have in common is we were able to have the privilege of working with Pete. And it was a huge privilege, and we miss him deeply, and that's why we all wanted to be here. And can I acknowledge Chris Huhn, who's Secretary of State? I think is that Amber Rudd as well, who also had that privilege of working with Pete and also profoundly served the country, whatever their party. I actually want to start off by telling you what I've been doing today with the people of Kingston, or some of them, people of Malmesbury, the people of Tamworth. And I've been celebrating the 1,100th anniversary of the coronation of King Athelstan. King Athelstan was the first king of England, and he's my favourite Anglo-Saxon king. Why am I mentioning King Athelstan, you might say? Well, because when you knew Pete and when you read his book, and I've skim-read it, you realise he was a patriot. And I think that's important in the modern politics to remember that you can be determined to tackle climate change and be a patriot. Sometimes that's missing from the current debate. And we start off this morning is joining a pilgrimage from Malmesbury, which had got to Hampton Court, and we walked the last 3 miles to Kingston. And it was along the River Thames. And I know how much Pete liked walking, and our wonderful landscape, our wonderful nature. And that was one of the reasons why he was so committed to the environment. And I think he would also, relish the anecdote about King Athelstan. Because I think he'd also realised that why are we doing all this? Well, we want to make sure that there is an England, United Kingdom, a world in 1,000 years' time. And if we don't act soon, there blooming well won't be. That's why I wanted to explain that anecdote. And I left my constituency having listened to one of the historians of King Athelstan, Tom Holland. And I was wondering whether the book tonight would be considered a history book. On the front cover, Pete says it's his personal history of Copse. And it's a really important one because he was there, right in the centre. And so it is a history book. And I think, as Grace said, it will help future people thinking about how did they try to manage through this. This is probably the best history on the Copse that has yet been written. But I think it's much, much more than that. in my skim reading so far, it looks to me like it's a manual on how to do climate diplomacy. You're learning the history, but you're learning how not to do it and how to do it, and all the many complexities. I mean, I only went to 3 COPs as a Secretary of State, and was always just being told by Pete what to do, by the way. I think we'll all admit that. We just did what Pete said. But the sheer complexity of these multilateral negotiations over many years, where humankind is trying to unpick the economy we built up over the last 250 years based on fossil fuels and try and get out of that in a relatively short space of time as a world. It is incredibly complicated. So it's not surprising that COPs have taken so long to make the progress. But as Pete does say in the book, it is the best way to do it. Yes, people criticize it, particularly those who don't want action on climate change, but it is the right thing to do. And it's great that Pete sets that out so clearly alongside his set of recommendations for what we all are doing, his challenges to us, actually, and the rest of those people involved in these climate negotiations. But it's more than a manual for climate diplomacy. I see it as a demand on politicians and policymakers. I mean, that's more in the conclusion, the last part of the book. But it's really clear how anxious he was that we wake up. And I probably don't need to tell anyone in this room or those people who are watching this streamed how urgent the situation is. But we have to keep winning these arguments. And Pete is saying, please go out and win those arguments every day. And he, I think one or two really stark points that come out in his reflections. One is that he desperately hopes that climate change does not become part of the culture war. And I fear it already is, and we've got to bring it back. And it's essential, and we've got to work cross-party, cross-country to try to rescue it from that situation. Because if it becomes part of that whatever you call it, it is seriously damaging and dangerous, and will prevent us making progress. He also reminds us of the two things that hopefully colleagues on all sides of the political spectrum can remember. The first is that climate change is the largest market failure in human history. And those of us who believe in markets, who believe in free trade, who believe in competition and so on, still should recognize that it's a market failure, and therefore we need to intervene and have clever interventions to put it right. And we have to make that argument again, because some people have failed to take that on board despite everything. And he makes the argument about sovereignty. Climate change does not respect borders, we know that, and he says that very clearly. And yet the argument on sovereignty has unfortunately come through and is undermining our world order, undermining international law, undermining our country's role in the world. We have to get over the fact that sovereignty means something different in the 21st century. And if we don't make that argument and get people on board for that, we're in real trouble. But Pete sort of ends, as Pete always would, is that look at the evidence, go for solutions, go for the art of the possible. And I know many of us are very committed to doing that, even if we live in a world where evidence doesn't seem to be as valuable as it used to be. Let me end by just some reflections on Pete himself. First of all, I want to say that Pete is right. And I think was it Nick or was it Grace who said, this, or it may have actually been Fiona, this is a love letter to the civil service. I hope we're all going to write love letters with Pete to the civil service. I was really privileged to work with some brilliant civil servants, and Pete was absolutely right at the top there. And we have to say to the country that this isn't a blob. This is one of the fantastic parts of our country, and we have to both treasure it and rebuild it and revalue it if we are going to make progress on anything but particularly climate change. And then they talk about the green blob, don't they? And that means the civil service and the NGOs and the academics. Well, can I speak up for the green blob as well? Because I'm grateful for the NGOs who hold ministers to account and push us and push the debate, and to the academics who help us talk through. And Pete, I'm sure, would be very much behind that. I have 3 lasting memories of Pete. One was my first COP, when he'd just been in a negotiating session where he'd had to listen to Su Wei. If you don't know who Su Wei is, he's in the book. He was the lead negotiator for the Chinese delegation on, many occasions. And he would always explain at every session the meaning of common but differentiated responsibilities at length, repeating the same speech. And this particular occasion, I think Pete had lost his patience, and a few blue words were spoken in the British delegation room. And that sort of introduced me to the frustrations that our negotiators have put up with. Then I do also remember, and it reflects on how hard Pete used to work. At the end of the Doha COP, we were at breakfast waiting to go get the taxis to the airport. And Pete was literally asleep in his bowl of cornflakes. And we had to wipe the milk off as we put him into the taxi. He had worked so hard. And the final one, actually, there's a picture of it in the book. I think it's called the Durban Huddle, and there's Chris Huhn there, as well as Pete. And, of course, the key thing is, who was at the centre of the world, surrounded by the Indians, the Chinese, and the Americans, and the EU, and the Brits? It was Pete. In the annual rugby scrum that there is at the end of each COP, there was Pete at the centre. And that's why he was so impressive, and we miss him. So, I am a fan of the first King of England, King Athelstan. He is my favourite Anglo-Saxon king. But in Pete, we had England's first climate diplomat, and he'll forever be my favourite climate diplomat.
Thank you so much, Ed. And our next special politician is John Gummer. And I promise not to talk about politics, but I did want to underline the non-political position that you held as chair of the Climate Change Committee, which is an example of an institutional structure which was set up in a cross-party way and which has performed as a cross-party institution of great value. And John, you're a big part of that story. That was not a political statement. So, John, thank you so much for being with us, and please, would you like to say something about Pete and the book?
Well, Pete was my private secretary, and so I started very early in his career. He managed to leave our passports when we were on the way to the airport. And I much respected the fact that I never knew this. He managed to get us into where we were to sit for the plane, and he said he was going to the loo. And actually, he went back to the embassy, got the passports back, got back, we got on the plane, and I never knew until he admitted it about 6 months later. Now, Cardinal Newman said, all of us are on this earth for a purpose, and the lucky ones amongst us know what it is. I think it's the most fundamental statement. And Pete knew what it was. He was always clear what it was that he had to do. Even before climate change, the whole environmental area where we worked together, he knew what we were trying to do. We were trying to learn again how to live in the world which is ours. But it isn't ours, it's been given to us, and we're supposed to look after it. And he knew that. That's what it was about. It was about doing that. And climate change was of importance because of the very reason that he understood, which is that climate change is the earth crying out for healing. It's all those other things we have to get right. And at the basis of that is that we have to get right our relationship with other people. And that's what he was so good at. He could get on with people. But there are many who get on with people because they've got no views of their own and are happily willing to listen to anybody else and move on. That wasn't Pete at all. He had very strong views of his own. But he managed to understand not only how you communicated those views to other people, but how you made other people feel that you listened to their views and that you took them on board and that you thought again about yours to make it possible for the 2 of you, the 4 of you, the 10 of you, the 20 of you, the 300 of you to come together actually to agree. And he did that for a whole range of reasons, but fundamentally because he knew why he was here, and he knew he couldn't achieve that unless he helped other people to achieve it together. And what this book is such a tribute to is that painstaking operation, which he was absolutely the master of bringing people to a point at which they can agree and then can act. It is not easy. And I am afraid I lose my temper very quickly at 2 kinds of attitudes, which are the opposite of Pete. The first are those who say, oh, all these negotiations and all that money being spent on flying all over the world and just work out how much emissions you've got for doing that. These are people who don't care about their own emissions at all, but they go on about this. But actually, this is the only way human beings can make decisions together. And the people who attack it are the people who don't actually think it matters, don't actually want to solve the whole issue. And the second time when I really get angry is people who think that somehow or other Britain shouldn't do these things until other people do. It's what I call the after you Claude view of life. And I'm afraid that's the position of a lot of politicians today. And they are deeply wrong. Because once you say it must be someone else, it will never happen. You have to start by saying, it's me. And I'm here to do this. And that's what Pete said. He didn't say, I'm here to do my bit in order that everybody realises that Britain has played a part in this. He didn't say that at all. He said, I'm here to make a success of this. I'm here to make Britain able to do what Britain has a great opportunity to do. That's why it is so important to restate what Pete understood, which was that commonality of purpose which created the Climate Change Act and the Climate Change Committee. And just in case no one has remembered, the Climate Change Act was originally written as a bill by Conservatives. It was accepted and made an act by Labour. It was supported by every political party in opposition, including the Democratic Unionist Party. Everybody supported it. And to break it now is to do something so fundamentally damaging, so wrong, that I can only use one word. It's wicked. It's just so wrong as to be wicked. We have to fight together to make Britain play her part, which has been so remarkable in enabling the world to come to the kind of decision which makes it possible for us to save this planet from ourselves, for ourselves. That's what Pete understood. I love Pete. He's kind enough to say I was a lifelong friend. We became more and more friends as he was dying. I don't think, in all my long life, that I've ever met two more remarkable people than Pete and Fiona. They weren't two people, they were an example of what marriage really can be. They were part of one. And together, they did it. And this book is not just a testimony to a climate negotiator. It's a testimony to love.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now we have a politician who actually is in the hot seat, who actually has to lead and has to show commitment. And thank you, Ed, for the leadership and commitment that you are showing. You worked closely with Pete, like others here. You knew him so well, and we'd like to ask you to say a few words. Thank you, Ed.
God, let me just start by saying I do love Lord Deben. And as a child growing up in the 1980s, as the son of a Marxist professor, I don't think I would have imagined I would be saying that today. Look, this is an incredibly humbling occasion. Massive thanks to Ed Davey, massive thanks to you, Grace, to you, Nick, for hosting us here. Most of all, to you, Fiona, for your just incredible courage and resilience and grace in the face of your loss to make this book happen. I mean, we are all just so admiring of you, so just thank you. This is an incredibly humbling occasion, and so much has been said about Pete already, and so eloquently by others, about his sort of passion for the cause of climate change, the exemplary civil servant he was. I think what a funny person he was, his incredible good humour in the face of the ups and downs of politics and government. His turn of phrase, the phrase I always remember that he said to me is, I asked him to explain the COP process to me, and he said, Ed, the thing you've got to understand is that process is the substance in this process, which is what I sort of took forward. Before I reflect on the messages of the book, I just want to say, and again, this has been reflected on, I think it's Pete as a human being that I think is just worth dwelling on tonight. You know, think of all of us confronted with diagnosis of a terminal illness and having 18 months to live, and then think about making the decision to write this book. And also, I'm really struck looking around all the audience and the faces here tonight, how many people I recognize who knew and worked with Pete. And you've got Amber and Chris and Ed and me and John here. You know, essentially all the secretaries of state he served with certainly since the period when I initially served with him in 2008. And I reflect that after I lost the general election in 2015, the civil servant who I went back and carried on my relationship with was Pete. And so looking around this room, I think what Pete's genius was, I think each of us in this room thought, I've got a special relationship with Pete. And I think we all did. And that is an incredible human quality, to have all of the people who are gathered here this evening to think, that they each had a special relationship with him. I just want to talk about 4 important messages from this book, and you know, in a sense, this is a book launch, this is a celebration of Pete, this is a sort of act of solidarity of all of us who care about these issues, and I think there is lots to learn from the book. I think the first thing to learn from the book is the long sweep of history that Pete sets out. And I think we as a movement are not good enough about talking about the progress. You know, when you look at where things were at when Pete started in the civil service, when you look at where things are after the Copenhagen summit, which I was at with him, and the, you know, near disaster that was, you know, it's really important to distinguish what Ronnie Cohen called an event recently that I was at, you know, the cycle from the trend. And the trend is towards action. And if you look at all of the data about we were heading for 4 degrees, now we all know we've got to go faster and we've got a mountain to climb. But I think it's really, really important, and I think the book is very good at setting this out. It's really important to understand the progress that has been made. Second, the why. Why were we able to make progress? And John is so right in what he said about this. You know, Pete knew better than anyone the frustrations of COP, the problems of COP. But the idea that the world without the COP would be a better place is absolute bullshit, frankly. You know, it's the Churchill phrase, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others that have been tried. You know, we're trying to negotiate the change in our economies for 194 countries. How else are you going to do this other than through multilateralism? And we would not have made the progress that we have made if it hadn't been for the COP process. And, you know, Amber, Chris, Ed, and I were all with Pete at those COPs, and you know, we all saw the difficulties, but we all saw the ability to make progress. And just if you think about COP26 in Glasgow and the progress that made under Conservative British leadership with Alok Sharma, again, it's an example of what these things can achieve. These are global forcing moments where world leaders are put on the spot, and I think it's incredibly valuable and important. And it is incredibly important that we as a government fight for this process because it's obviously under attack, and fight to defend this process and the principles of climate diplomacy because they really, really matter. The second point. Third point, we face sort of daunting challenges. I think the thing that comes through for me also in the book is the extent to which Pete was a coalition builder. He was a coalition builder at home, and he was a coalition builder internationally. You know, his genius, his ability was to reach out to negotiators from other countries and find common ground with them. And I think the book is giving us a message about that importance, building the coalitions at home. And I think, in a sense, also on this point about the sweep of history, we've got more opportunity to build the coalitions now than we did domestically. When you think about the job opportunities that we have, for example, from the transition. So building that coalition domestically and building it internationally as well. And it's so interesting this, because when the Copenhagen summit happened and obviously the world was, you know, felt quite devastated, Pete picked himself up, and I'm going to come to this in my final point, built the Cartagena Dialogue, and you can draw a thread from the Cartagena Dialogue to the Paris Agreement. And that says something about him. And that takes me to my final point, which I think really shines through from the book. He used to say, in a jokey way to me, I'm just a bureaucrat, Minister, or I'm just a bureaucrat, Ed. I think Pete was actually something else above all, which was he was an optimist. He was an optimist. And he was sometimes a curmudgeonly optimist. But I think it's so important, this. What I said about what happened after Copenhagen and the work he did, only an optimist could have done that. And I think in that sense, he shares something with all the change makers of history. and I just really want to say this to everyone in this audience, which is pessimism is a luxury we cannot afford. It is easy to look at the world and feel worried, daunted, anxious, and even worse. But pessimism never did anything. Pessimism never took a fraction of a degree off global temperatures, never protected anyone in a vulnerable country. And I think, and this is the point I want to end on, I think Pete's giving us a message in this book, which is the way to honour his legacy is to be the optimists, is to never succumb to pessimism, never succumb to the idea that it can't be done, that it's a hopeless cause, always seek to find the common ground, always build the coalitions, and always act and work to make our country and our world better. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much to Fiona and Grace for the book and being with us. And I hope you'll recognise the point I was trying to make when I introduced these three outstanding politicians. It is about clarity, commitment, judgment, and values. And Pete helped them keep going. Pete helps all of us keep going. So, Ed Davey, thank you. John Gummer, thank you. Ed Miliband, thank you so much for being with us. Now, we've got half an hour left. There's a tradition at the LSE not to dwell on agreement. And I'm sure you've got lots of questions. And so I'm going to chair that as best I can. We normally take 3 questions at a time. And please could you say who you are, honestly. And if you want to, direct the questions at a particular speaker, but it doesn't have to be directed at a particular speaker. So I'll probably stand up so I can see better, but the people to whom the questions will be directed will be sitting down. Those mics should be working. So could you raise your hands, please, and I'll try to put 3 questions together. Yes. So right at the top there should be mics. Yeah. 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 And I know
Hi, it's Amber Rudd.
I know who you.
Not that I feel
I know who
jealous or
you are,
left
but you
out.
had to say it.
And I just want to join all your tributes and thank you and thank Fiona for everything. My question is, the Climate Change Act would never get through now. I appreciate the optimism of the book and the call not to have culture wars, but we're in one. And we have to find a way of communicating with the public differently, perhaps, although the bungee jumping is very good, Ed. Because a third of the public now think that climate change doesn't exist, reform is ahead in the polls. Everybody here are already converted. How do we change our language so that we start to win people who are otherwise being lost to us in terms of the necessary action being taken?
Thank you, Amber. I'm going to take 2 more questions. That's a big one to start with, but thank you so much. And thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you. Question? Just here, please.
Ed, you made the point about how often we don't...
There are 2. There are 2 Eds.
Ed Davis.
And you haven't told us your name.
My name's Neil. You made the link between how we don't often think of a patriot and a climate activist. And that really led me to think about how often we don't talk about the intersection of class and climate. So what do you think needs to be done so that everyone is heard and that climate isn't just a topic for a certain demographic?
Thank you, Neil. And this gentleman up there. Here's a mic, please.
Thank you. My name's Theo Silverstone. It's for the panel collectively. I want to kind of go one further. than Amber, and not just say communicate with the public, but co-create. And from where I sit, one thing I feel that we lack in the UK is a cohesive vision of what that changed UK looks like. What can you say on that, and where does that come from? Does it come from government? Does it come bottom up? Lots of questions.
Thank you very much. I don't want to direct the questions because I think they're for all of you, but who would like to begin? I think I'd like to ask all three of you to respond, but who would like to go first?
Look, really important questions, and in a way, I think they all actually, they all sort of relate to each other. Look, the first thing to say is Amber is completely right that there is a massive challenge, and we see the challenge from reform and from where the Conservative Party is moving. And it's really, really important to sort of surface that and to be candid about it. I'm not saying you're doing this in your question, but we also mustn't overestimate the scale of the backlash. There is still majority support for action in this country. Okay, Rishi Sunak had lots of problems at the last election, but I remember when he gave his speech, sort of, trying to abandon the net zero consensus. It didn't work for him at the last election. So it isn't to say there isn't real challenge and challenge we should take seriously, but I think Westminster tends to overstate the scale of this challenge, first point. Second point, the way to win this argument, and it relates to the second point about class, is, and I always say this, we have to be in the better lives today business as well as the disaster avoidance business tomorrow. If we can show people that the action we're taking is creating good jobs and cleaner air and warmer homes and lower bills and a better transport system and all of those things, then that is the way to win the argument. And I actually have always felt this, but I obviously feel it even more now. I think if you just say to people, we need to take this action to protect generations in 20, 30, 40, 50 years to come, you'll get some people with you, but you won't get enough with you. And so I think all of it has to be directed to how do we show people the benefits that you can get. And some of the stuff we're doing here, I'll just give you an example of what I won't give you the long list of things we're doing, but we've put solar panels on the roofs of 200 schools and 200 hospitals through Great British Energy. That is about people being able to see in their local area, well, this is actually what the clean energy transition is about. It's about lower energy bills for our school, more money for frontline teachers, and it is about those practical things that people can point to. Third and last point, I think, on this, and also the second point is really, really important, which is, this can't simply be about a middle-class pursuit. This has got to be about cutting people's cost of living and showing people good jobs at good wages, which frankly people have been crying out for a long time. And whether it's in nuclear or carbon capture and storage or offshore wind, we can create the best, as Nick Stern always says, it's the single best growth opportunity of the 21st century. And the last point is this, which is, and it goes to that, which is, I think in a way that wasn't so true 15 years ago, we can now show those benefits. For 2/3 of the world, new renewables are cheaper than new fossil fuels. And so, I actually think, although lots of people want to deny this, the economics has moved in our direction. Of course, there are bumps in the road. So I think that is the vision. But I think it's also right to say that we also have to give communities the chance to be part of that, whether it's through community energy or other things, because that's a crucial part of making this happen.
Well, in order to be an optimist, I am an optimist about this, because everywhere I go in the country, I find all sorts of organisations which are doing things to contribute to the battle against climate change. And talking about class, they are every kind of person. That's what's so exciting. Last week I was with the Debenham, which is my little local village, the Debenham Green Team. And there they were, collecting the kind of things that you want to not put into the waste bin, but you can't easily put it either into the recycling bin and collecting those, and they've got a scheme whereby people drop them off in the specialist recycling places when they're going past. So there's not even an extra journey. They worked it out. They do that, and they run it in that way. It's just one. Everywhere around the country, there are people who are doing that. There are 167 repair cafes. In other words, people repairing things rather than throwing them away. There are a whole range of things that are happening. I believe that we have got to be absolutely optimistic about that bit. Second thing is, we've got to talk about this not only as opportunities for people now, but in language which they understand. That's why I hate net zero, because it doesn't mean anything to people. You've got to talk about, let's have cleaner air. And then you can ask people, do you really want dirtier air? Is that your idea? Is your idea that we're going to have people going down? When people say, I don't want to have solar panels, I don't want to have solar farms, and I don't want to have these awful pylons, I just say, no, you were perfectly willing for other people to go down mines and dig out coal so that you were able to have electricity, but evidently you're not prepared to think about you contributing to the situation that we have now so that we can get the electricity which you're going to use, and you're going to use it for your benefit. And I'm fed up with those politicians who in general are very much in favour of all this, but not here. And not over the border either, but far enough away where it doesn't matter. And that is where we have to talk the language that people understand. We've got to talk about it in proper words, in English. And the examples have got to be those. So it's the examples of saying, isn't it much better to have products that you can repair? And wouldn't it be a good idea, and it would be a good idea actually, actually to make it impossible to produce irons you can't repair, to produce electric... I mean, it is an outrage. People are making electric kettles which specifically you cannot repair, so that you have to buy another one of those. And those are the things which people understand. So the solutions are also part of the story. These are solutions which people immediately warm to. I'm a great believer of the concept that Mothers Against Asthma are the most powerful group I can think of. And the idea that you want to go on having the cars putting out dirty, horrible things at exactly the level that you're pushing your baby seems to me to be the sort of way that you explain what we're trying to do. We're trying to do these things more effectively. And I do think all governments have been extremely bad at explaining those things in that language. The previous Conservative government said he didn't want to have an information campaign because it was in somehow or other unsuitable. The present government doesn't have an information campaign, and I want to try to press it all the time to do it. But the last thing is this. We won't win this battle unless we have a vision, and give people a vision. Give people a feeling that this is something which will change their lives, make it better, that it's really doing something which will improve things for them. And that's why nature is so important in this. The idea that biodiversity and climate change are kind of two alternatives is absolute nonsense. People care about nature, they care about that, and that's one of the ways that you give them this vision that we can live in a country which actually is going to be cleaner and better and actually more exciting and various. We're going to regain what we have lost. And once you start talking in that language, I have to say, even the most hardened supporters of reform begin to think differently. It's very interesting when you do the polling of the people who are thinking of voting reform. They are not what
That's
Mr.
true.
Tice would like them to be.
True.
And that is why we have to win them to the understanding that this is an all-party thing. If they are foolish enough to think that the rest of reform is right, that's up to them. But the bit that they can share with all of us is that we want a better life for all our people, and that better life is cleaner, and it's a better life because we are better off and we're healthier and our children are as well. But as I say, at my age, this is not just for them, it's for me. Because if we don't win this battle, the rest of my life will be considerably less good.
I agree with them. And I am an optimist too, although possibly not quite as optimistic as those wonderful contributions. Let me start where I do think we should challenge this myth that reform is taking all before them. If you look at YouGov polls of young people, they're not supporting reform. I mean, please tell the BBC to report about this, it'd be quite good. But reform are not winning on those areas. That doesn't mean they're not winning more than perhaps they were in the past. They probably are going a little bit further forward. But we've got to push back, and I think we absolutely can. That doesn't mean we've got to use new forms of media. I mean, apparently I have a TikTok account. Apparently, and apparently it goes quite well. And we do need to get on those and take the argument using humour as well. And Neil's point, I think schools are critical. And when I go around schools in my patch, young people are really up for taking action. They're really worried. So let's push back against this idea that it's all going reform's way in this area. It really, really isn't. And I think in Pete's book, he writes he talked to some Conservative politicians and they were worried that actually they were losing young people on this issue. So, you know, it's in the book as well. But, and there is a but here, we just can't be complacent because this is too important. And so we need to fight back. And one thing we've got to do, and I know Ed's working on this, and let's make it cross-party, we've got to get people's energy bills down. You know, because of Ukraine, they've become a bigger concern. And we have to find a way to show that actually the way to get energy bills down permanently is through renewables, is through energy insulation, not being so dependent on volatile gas, which sets the marginal price of electricity and is the main contributor. And we have to say that if Reform, or indeed the Conservatives, want a gas approach, well, they're basically saying you want higher energy bills into the future. And we should also say about Reform, they want to frack in your backyard.
Yeah, 100%.
They want to frack in all these different places. There's 138 constituencies which some of them were previously Conservative held, but Reform have got their eyes on, and they want to frack in those. So I think that won't go down too well, in my view. Other thing, let's just try to deal with some of the other things that I think are making people more pessimistic. And I think it's the international phase, which goes to the last point about how do you do this. Yes, you do it bottom up. And in the States, despite the current incumbent of the White House, some of the states are still doing great stuff. They're ignoring what's coming from the White House and where they can. But of course, it's not as easy as it was because he's making it more difficult. And that's why I think internationally, and this is not a challenge to you, Ed, because I'm very happy to help on this, but just in the way that the Prime Minister talked about the coalition of willing with Ukraine, we've argued about the coalition of the willing on the economy to work with those countries that still believe in free trade and don't want tariffs. What about a coalition of the willing on climate? That's what Pete would have said at a COP, trying to get those, whether it's a Cartagena Dialogue or others, let's get those people who do want to take action, who do want to make agreement. And if that has to be outside COP, as well as in COP, let's do that. And I think we can show that there are many, many governments around the world who want to go forward.
Thank you all very much. I can't resist taking the opportunity that Ed Miliband fed me. I'd like to invite you all to come to the launch of, this is an academic statement, right? So you probably complete the paragraph for me yourself. But I'd like to ask you to come to the launch of my new book, which has got the title, The Growth Story of the 21st Century. Very deliberately definite article in that. Subtitle, The Economics and Opportunity of Climate Action. I can see one or two people from the Stern Review in the audience. So this is, if you like, Stern Review 2.0, November the 5th, here at the LSE. The second is, I think, Amber, we've heard how it's possible to respond to your challenge, but I think we have to underline that we really, really have to respond effectively and more effectively than we've been able to do in the past. And as Pete said, and Peter Clark picked it up, and I'm sure Fiona Harvey here from The Guardian's picking these things up. We're actually in a position to respond much more powerfully than we were 10 or even 5 years ago. And the obstacles lie in economy, politics, society. And they lie in the way in which we take on, communicate, act. And Edmund, I totally agree with you, and really with the whole platform. It's one thing to say that it's much better and cheaper and cleaner. And it absolutely is to go down this route. But people have to see it, and they have to see it soon. And I think that's something which was shared in all the remarks here, and we hope that will really start to happen very quickly. And we're here to help in that process. So we've got time, I think, for one more round of there, everybody's come. I won't be able to fit you all in. But just a lady just here with the, yes. And then, yeah, no, I'll go one by one, but it's just here. What, you can pass it forward. Yeah, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Jill Rutter from the Institute for Government. I wanted to ask a slightly different question, which was about the point about Pete as an exceptional civil servant. We've seen the government over the last year, Ed, not you, but other of your colleagues, slightly falling out of love after the initial positive moves. We, by December, were in the tepid bath of managed decline with the Prime Minister. And I just wondered whether, based on Pete's rather odd career, where he stuck with the same issue, had quite a big public profile, turned down promotions to stick with it, whether you reflected on his career and what that actually meant for giving ministers the sort of civil service that they really wanted.
Thank you, Jim. And could you pass the gentleman in the tie immediately behind you? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. John Ashton, friend of Pete and Fiona, and escaped diplomat, indeed climate diplomat for a while. And this may just be a more international version of Amber Rudd's question, but I mean, we now live at a time where a lot of the things that we have taken for granted throughout our lives, the idea that our politics should be based on an attempt to understand reality and deal with reality, rather than tell a fairy story and try and lead people into that fairy story. The idea that when we face problems together, we should cooperate to solve them rather than digging trenches and lobbing grenades at each other. And of course, democracy itself. And we had a very visual manifestation of many of the representatives of that assault on those principles in Beijing the other day. And my question is, can we win the climate struggle as quickly as we need to win it, unless at the same time we can win the other struggle to defeat that assault on those principles of how we live together decently in the world. Mr. Trump wasn't in Beijing, but I would very much include him in that picture. And just quickly to say to Ed Miliband, if I may, Pete and I, when we were together in dark moments, often used to take refuge together in an aphorism of somebody who may, I don't know, have been a frequent subject of discussion around your family table, Antonio Gramsci, who famously wrote that he was a pessimist of the intellect, but an optimist of the will. And I think we both identified with that. And of course, in the end, it's the will that really matters. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And right at the end, please, lady in the red.
Thank you. Eliette Riera I was lucky enough to work with Pete in the civil service. I'm now in civil society. And one question for all of you, including the non-politicians amongst you. Pete reflected quite a lot on the Paris Agreement and the ambition cycle that was to materialize after this. And I remember talking to him in the last couple of years where he wondered what that went, and he reflected a lot that the civil society pressure that he hoped would come, and it comes through in his book as well, never quite materialized in the way that he felt that it should or that it would. I wanted to hear your reflections on how could government facilitate this, both in the UK and abroad, and how can we bring this question of it's not just about other countries and we have to start at home, but how can we still encourage others to do it? And what advice do you have? For example, I work in the financial sector now, and with everything that's happening in the US, there's a lot of rowback in the commitment and the ambition, not because they don't think it's the good idea, because they don't want to be seen to do that. So how do I continue to work with my members and my colleagues, and what message can you give, including from a communication editorial and from that book, that can help that ambition cycle become a reality?
Thank you very much. Now, this is really going to have to be your last 90 seconds each. So say what you'd like to do in conclusion to the three of our politicians here. Grace, is there anything you wanted to add before we close?
Yeah, just on the civil society point, you're absolutely right. He does take a relatively critical line of NGOs and civil society in the book. I think he expresses frustration a lot of the time at their inability to meet him where he was, you know, in the thick of everything. And for me, it comes down to a question of strategy and long-sightedness for NGOs and communication specialists, not just thinking in kind of shorter-term campaign cycles, but longer-term relational cycles, where you're focused more on developing and nurturing meaningful relationships with people like Pete, rather than, you know, what's our next little comms win for our own organisation. And I appreciate that it's about finding a balance there. But yeah, Pete really, in the book, expressed a kind of a frustration, at kind of not being held more to account for his responsibilities, but B, not being kind of sought out in the way that he strategically sought out other people who he recognised were allies for him. So I guess it's, yeah, he would kind of encourage people working in civil society to practice what he was doing a bit more.
Thank you, Grace. Now, we really do have to close at 8, so I'm just going to ask our three, Ed, John and Ed, just your closing thoughts, and if you're able to pick up the questions along the way, please do, but it's not possible, obviously, to answer all of them now.
Well, on the civil service point, Ed can speak for the current government. I remember having discussion about civil service reform during the coalition years, and when everyone had finished having a go at the civil service, I caught the Prime Minister's eye and said, what I really think we need is more training for ministers to get the best out of their civil servants. And you could have heard a pin drop. It didn't go down well, but I think it's the right thing. I think in terms of civil society, I had some discussion with Pete because he got very frustrated with some of them. Sorry if you're in the room, but I shared that to a certain extent because I think part of the issue is getting civil society in other countries better mobilised, because the civil society in our country is actually pretty good, and sometimes you go after the people who are actually on your side to try to get them a little bit more, whereas if you went after and helped the civil society in Poland or the Czech Republic, you'd actually get a bigger bang for your buck. John, on terms of the geopolitics, well, there's no easy answer to that. I wouldn't mind your advice. My last answer about a coalition of the willing is maybe the way forward in the short term. But, you know, the fact that the US is pushing India into the hands of China and Russia is just a disaster.
Agreed.
My friend Lord Deepen wants me to go next. I mean, there's such great questions. On the civil service point, I love the civil service. And it's been an absolute privilege to be working again with the civil service over the last 14 months. I think there is something to say, though. You see, I actually think the thing about Pete, yes, he worked in international climate for a long time, but there are lots of people here who work on international climate. Some of them have worked in it a long time, some of them have worked in a shorter time. It's not, I don't think it's just about long service, it's about a culture. He encouraged an incredible culture. And I think I said this at an event we did here when Rachel Kike did her lecture. You know, that culture that Pete, a sort of can-do, idealism, mission, I think it was just an incredible culture that he built. John Ashton, your questions are too profound for me to answer. I never met Gramsci, but he was, I'm sure, a subject of discussion. I just to end on this point. I actually think we need more pressure from civil society. I think the civil society point is really, really important, and I think that's why I said the thing in my remarks about we've got part of it is telling the story about the future, but we also have to tell the story about the past. I think if we convince young people in particular that you know, people have been going on about this for ages and nothing's happened, I think it's bad. We've got to convince people that change has happened, which it has, and also, you know, not to come to the idea that suddenly everybody is against climate action because I think they're not.
I think Pete would want us to go away with something positive to do. So I'm going to do something embarrassing. I do it at every meeting I do, so don't get cross. Hands up, everybody here who has been to see their Member of Parliament on climate change in the last 6 months. Hands up. Now that's the explanation. We can't make democracy work if we're not using it. And I just want everyone here to make sure that their Member of Parliament actually understands what the public really means. That I want no Member of Parliament to go back to their constituency without knowing every time they have a surgery that there'll be at least one person who will tell them about climate change so that they can't hide. And the trouble is, most of them do hide, and they say very simply, oh, nobody ever actually asks us on the doorstep about climate change. So everyone here must do that, and you get others as well. Let's make sure that no surgery goes on anywhere in the country without at least one person pressing Pete's view of climate change. Let's do that for him.
I endorse that message, but could I say go in a short sleeve shirt and say you're doing it on behalf of Pete?
Thank you. Now, the questions were really bubbling up, and we could have stayed and taken so many more, but we do have to finish now. But I think we've had a very special evening. I'd like to thank Ed, John, and Ed for being here, for working so well with Pete, for learning from Pete as you described it, and the way in which you stuck the course has been enormously valuable. And I'm sure everyone here is with you and is going to work out how to encourage many more others to be with you along the way, all three of you. So thank you so much. I feel that Pete's actually with us this evening. This is a place of ideas, and Pete was a person of ideas, and Pete's ideas are here through his book tonight, and they're here through Grace and Fiona. And thank you both very much. Fiona, it's just been wonderful what you've done with Grace and the others to carry this through. So thank you so much for being with us. And please.